One of the most common complaints leveled against video games is the widespread use of the damsel in distress trope. From Super Mario to Super Meat Boy. From Ghosts and Goblins to Ghouls and Ghosts. From Final Fight to Final Fantasy. From The Legend of Zelda to Altered Beast. From Prince of Persia to Castlevania. From Double Dragon to Donkey Kong. It is undeniable that many games kick off the action by placing an unfortunate woman in grave danger, and then informing the player that, as the male protagonist, it is his duty to run off and rescue her. Many third-wave gender feminists take issue with this common plot device, claiming that it reinforces harmful stereotypes about the role of women in society. That, each time a video game makes the rescue of a captured woman its primary goal, it underscores the notion that women are helpless, weak, and unable to fend for themselves. And, in contrast, that men are strong, powerful, and capable. Some feminists will speak of the subject-object dichotomy, whereby men are the subjects, or the actors, and women are the objects, or the beings which are acted upon. And hence, they say, every time we see this trope in gaming, we see evidence of the patriarchy at work, and proof of how society and media tends to reinforce the dominance of men over women. In several of my other videos about sexism in gaming, I have spoken about the role that ideology plays in shaping how one views the world. I have also talked about how one way to expose ideological viewpoints is simply to give due consideration to the counterpoint. A lot has already been said about what the damsel in distress trope allegedly means for the position of women in society. But what about the obvious reciprocal notion? What does being repeatedly asked to rescue a damsel in distress mean as it relates to men and their role? I'd like to take a moment to consider this position. In so doing, let's use perhaps the most exemplary, and some might say egregious, instance of the damsel trope in all of video gaming. That of the 1983 Laserdisc game, Dragon's Lair.
Dragon's Lair, the fantasy adventure where you become a valiant knight on a quest to rescue the fair princess from the clutches of an evil dragon. You control the actions of a daring adventurer finding his way through the castle of a dark wizard who has enchanted it with treacherous monsters and obstacles.
Here, we see all the ingredients taken to their ridiculous endpoints. So much so that the game is almost a self-parody. Princess Daphne is our damsel in distress. She's completely helpless and highly sexualized. Clearly, her whole existence is to provide motivation for the hero by serving as the ultimate reward.
Please save me! The cage is locked with a key. The dragon keeps it around his neck. To slay the dragon, use the magic sword.
Normally, the analysis from your average ideological feminist stops right there. We've done all we need to prove the existence of the patriarchy, right? So it's time to move on. But wait a minute. What about our hero? The alliteratively named Dirk the Daring? What's his role in the story? For those of you who have played the game all the way through, you know that Dirk doesn't have a single speaking line in the entire game. He never says an intelligible word. Instead, all he ever does is grunt and yelp and cry out in pain when things go wrong. And oh boy, do things ever go wrong for poor Dirk. In his quest to rescue Princess Daphne, he gets slashed and strangled and burned and mangled and eaten and smacked and drowned and cracked and gassed and crushed and fried and mushed and so on and so on. When you look through the gaming universe of Dragon's Lair through Dirk's eyes, it quickly becomes apparent that his entire purpose is to die over and over again until he finally gets it right and wins the girl. So, if Princess Daphne is our damsel in distress, It stands to reason that Dirk the Daring is our disposable dude. And what is our hero's reward for all his agony and personal sacrifice? Why, it is 5 seconds of affection from the princess. That's our Dirk's happy ending. But of course, these complementary tropes aren't unique to the game Dragon's Lair. Anytime you have a game that revolves around a damsel in distress, you have the corollary of the dude is disposable when the game is examined from the male hero's perspective. For example, when our friendly little plumber Mario heads off to rescue Princess Peach because she's been captured by Bowser yet again, he too becomes a disposable dude, dedicated to fighting and striving and dying over and over again until he finally blunders his way through and wins her favor. In the case of Super Mario 64, our hero's long and painful persistence eventually culminates with Princess Peach kissing him on the nose and promising to bake him a delicious cake.
Thank you, Mario. We have to do something special for you. Here we go! Listen, everybody. Let's bake a delicious cake. For Mario.
And of course, this trope of the male protagonist giving everything he has, including his own life, in order to win a bit of affection from a distressed damsel, isn't limited to just video games. You can readily find it in other forms of media as well, be that in movies, or comics, or literature. In fact, if you were to ask many women to name their favorite romantic movies, it is likely that a top pick among them would be the film Titanic. And how does Titanic end? With Jack freezing to death as he sacrifices himself so that Rose can go on to live a long and healthy life. Whenever you find a media representation of the damsel in distress theme, it is challenging, if not impossible, not to also find the dude is disposable theme walking alongside her. So, yes, you'll find plenty of women getting themselves into all kinds of dangerous predicaments almost everywhere you look. But in nearly every case, you'll also find men ready to dispose of everything, including their lives, in heroic attempts to rescue them and, perhaps, to earn a bit of their favor. But this kind of pressure upon men to sacrifice all in seeking for the favor of women isn't restricted just to imaginary media. It can be seen in the real world as well. For example, in World War I, British men who didn't want to enlist to go fight in the horrors of trench warfare found themselves being publicly shamed by women who would present them with a white feather, symbolizing their cowardice. The message was clear. Britain was under threat by German aggression, and that meant that British women were potentially damsels in distress. It was the duty of all young men to willingly sacrifice themselves to the war machine in their preemptive defense. Which brings us back to the point of this video, the role of ideology in approaching media criticism. On the one hand, if you approach an entertainment medium, say video games, exclusively from the position of it being created within a patriarchal milieu, you will be inclined to frame everything in terms of how it harms or diminishes women. But on the other, if you regard the same media exclusively from the perspective of how it portrays men, you'll find yourself on the other side of the looking glass. You may even start to regard media and society as primarily gynocentric, in that men are constantly encouraged to sacrifice everything they have in the service of earning the favor of women. However, because the ideological extremes of patriarchy and gynocentrism are mutually exclusive, we know that both things can't be right. And hence, we can observe people polarizing into their respective ideological camps, each one trying to score points and hoping to win the oppression Olympics and prove that their side is the right one. My contention is that neither extreme position is correct because neither position gives due consideration to its necessary complement. The damsel in distress and the dude is disposable theme are two sides of the same coin. They don't exist independently, but rather in tandem, with each side representing a sort of a distillation of the gender roles we often observe in society. The real question shouldn't then be which one is right, but rather why these tropes exist at all. Are they, as some postmodern gender feminists may contend, purely social constructs? Or are they perhaps inspired by a reflection of biological necessities? But that conversation is something for another time. Until then, I wish you well in distressing your damsels and in disposing your dudes. Game on, my friends!